Chapter 236, Taming Disillusionment, N1/2. His sister's face faded into the crowd, her terrified eyes desperately searching for him as the guards dragged her in the opposite direction. Han stretched out his small hands, tried to reach her, but other arms held him firmly in place. "Hedda! Hedda!" he screamed, his childish voice breaking with the effort. Tears streamed down his face, hot against his cold skin. "Han!" His sister's voice echoed one last time before disappearing behind a carriage door. "I'll find you. I promise." The promise was never fulfilled. The following years merged into an endless sequence of exhaustive training to transform him into a perfect tool. Physical pain became so constant that Han learned to mentally separate himself from it, observing it as if it were happening to someone else. "Remember the rules," the instructor repeated, his face always in shadows as Han lay exhausted on the training floor. The cold stone pressed against his cheek, the only comfort in a world of calculated cruelty. "You know perfectly well that you are forbidden from seeing her directly, but if I contribute to my nation, Yaina will ensure my sister has a good life." Han completed mechanically, the words engraved in his mind after countless repetitions. "The queen you got is your last resort," the instructor continued, his voice monotonous but laden with threat. "The only situation in which you will use it is one where a high-priority target is within your reach. Otherwise, it's better that you die without ever using it rather than showing it to the enemy." The instructor then leaned in, his hot breath against Han's bruised face. "Remember that if we find out you committed that offense, she will pay the consequences." The image of Hedda, now blurred after years of separation, was the only thing that kept Han functioning, the only thing that gave him purpose amid so much suffering. Her memory was both his strength and his weakness, the reason he endured, and the chain that bound him to his master's will. "Do you understand?" "Yes, master, I understand." The memory vanished like mist on the sun when a new wave of pain shot up from his knee and through Han's body. He focused on ignoring it as always, but reality returned brutally. The underground chamber, the abyssal monster, debris everywhere. And Run, that strange mushroom boy, try and protect him with his own body. The spear struck first. It penetrated cleanly into the segment where the new core pulsed, the tip piercing layers of alien tissue until reaching its target. Rin reached Han an instant later, just in time thanks to the beast twisting in pain just as the tentacles were about to make contact. "Hide in the tunnel," Rin shouted, positioning his body between Han and the beast, using his own flesh as a shield. His mushrooms pulsed frantically, casting erratic shadows across his determined face. The beast writhed a few meters away, its energy distribution reconfiguring after losing another core. Han tried to stand to escape as requested, but a sharp pain in his leg stopped him. He looked down and saw the tear in his pants, blood soaking the fabric, his leg clearly fractured from the previous impact. Even if he ignored the pain, he couldn't move fast like this. He couldn't escape before the monster attacked again. If he used the carrion queen, he could save himself, but that would mean eliminating Run with his own hands, sacrificing an innocent to save himself, a final betrayal of whatever humanity remained within him. It wasn't something he wanted to do, so all that remained was to die as bait, and he accepted this fact with a calmness that would surprise anyone who hadn't gone through his training. Death was simply another possibility for which they had prepared him as a spy, another variable in the equation, the final page in a story written by others. "Run," he called, his voice strangely serene. "Leave me. Save yourself." Rin turned to him, his face marked by small cuts and dirt, his light pulsing weakly. Exhaustion had carved deep lines around his eyes, yet determination blazed within them. "I can't," Rin responded, and Han could see in his eyes something he immediately recognized. Genuine determination. It wasn't the manufactured determination that had been instilled in him during years of training. It was something natural, something real. "I already told you I couldn't sleep, and if I don't sleep, training with Lin is much worse." Han felt a strange mixture of emotions. Admiration for this boy who, with that beast and against all odds, had earned the respect of so many. Envy for the freedom that radiated from him, for having real friends, for being able to simply be himself, for having something to protect by his own choice, not out of obligation or fear, for possessing the very thing Han had been denied, the simple right to make his own decisions. "Don't be foolish," Han shouted, frustration breaking his facade of calm. "We'll both die if you stay." Ren simply smiled, that carefree smile he wore even in the tensest moments, and turned toward the beast that was beginning to recover. The segment following the destroyed one pulsed with increasing intensity, the purple energy condensing to form a new central core. "I don't plan to die," he stated with simplicity that seemed almost absurd given the situation. The abyssal beast, now reorganized around its third core, prepared a frontal attack. Its tentacles, combined with insect legs and chitinous extensions, formed a living spear aimed directly at the children. Han closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable impact. His last thought was for Hedda, silently apologizing for not being able to send her one final farewell letter. But instead of the pain he expected, he felt a wave of heat and heard a hissing sound, like compressed air being released under pressure. He opened his eyes to witness something impossible. Lines of pure light traversed Ren's body, no longer emitting their usual soft glow. Now they shone with blinding intensity, converging in geometric patterns over the diamond plates covering his body. All the luminous energy seemed to concentrate in front of Ren, condensing into a brilliant point. The light intensified with each second, transitioning from a soft glow to a concentrated ray of pure energy. With a cry that channeled all his determination, Ren released the accumulated energy, a ray of light, so bright that Han had to narrow his eyes to avoid being blinded. The beam cut through the air, impacting directly against the beast's frontal attack. There was a moment of resistance, a frozen instant where opposing forces met and fought for supremacy. Then Ren's light prevailed. The tentacles and extremities forming the creature's attack disintegrated upon contact with the ray. Pulverized by the pure energy, the beam continued its relentless trajectory, vaporizing the beast's body segment by segment. Where it touched, corruption was cleansed, abyssal energy dissipated, and alien flesh simply ceased to exist. Han observed with absolute incredulity. The child whom some idiots called rotten, whom they despised for having the weakest beast, was facing an abyssal abomination with a power they couldn't dream of acquiring. Chapter 237, Taming Disillusionment, and 2/2. Fragments of abyssal tissue scattered throughout the chamber. 3 complete segments were entirely destroyed. The other 15 remaining, now headless, collapsed with a dull thud. But the monstrosity was far from defeated. Before Han's horrified eyes, the beast began to reorganize itself once again. What remained of its original 20 segments, after losing 5 in battle, began to restructure. The last segment of the front started to swell and transform, translucent membrane stretching as a new structure formed. A grotesque mouth with rows of triangular teeth arranged in concentric rings. All remaining segments began functioning in coordination again, like independent control centers forming a collective organism, each capable of directing the whole. The abomination wasn't a creature with multiple vital organs. It was multiple creatures fused into a single modular consciousness. Ren fell to one knee, completely exhausted. The light had diminished to a faint glow, barely enough to illuminate his exhausted face. Despite his condition, Ren extended his arms in front of Han, determined to continue protecting him until the end. Han observed this boy, so different from anyone he had met before. Someone with genuine concern for others. A memory, so vivid it almost hurt, emerged from the depths of his mind. "Why do you try so hard?" Han remembered asking, his childish voice filled with genuine curiosity as he watched his sister mending their worn clothes by the light of an almost consumed candle. Hedda had looked up, her fingers momentarily stopping their meticulous work. Her eyes were reddened from fatigue, but her smile never faltered when she spoke to him. "Because I love you, silly," she had answered with that particular mixture of toughness and tenderness that only she knew how to combine. "But the adults say we're pests," Han had insisted, repeating the cruel words he had heard whispered in the alleys. "That there are too many like us, that we consume resources." Hedda had put down the needle and taken his face between hands calloused from work, forcing him to look at her directly. "Listen to me, Han." Her voice had become intense, almost fierce. No matter what they say, no matter our situation. I want you to be a good person. I promised our mother. You must be someone who knows what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. But, no buts, she had interrupted. Promise me. Promise that you'll always try to do what's right, no matter what happens. And he, too young to fully understand what he was promising, had solemnly nodded. I promise, sister. The memory faded, but left something vital in its place. A certainty, a decision. Ren deserved to live. This boy, who had been willing to sacrifice himself defending him, who represented exactly what Hedda had wanted for him, deserved to have a chance. If I use my second beast, he'll discover me, Han thought, anxiety tightening his stomach. And if I'm discovered, Hedda will pay the consequences. But as he watched Ron, still trying to protect him, something changed inside him. A crystalline resolution formed, displacing years of fear and conditioning. No, Han decided. Hedda wouldn't want me to be different. She would want me to do what's right, especially when it's difficult. With a certainty he had never felt before, Han activated his beast. It wasn't a normal manifestation. It was Yino's extreme style, where human and beast not only fused but intermingled. His fractured leg dissolved into a mass of pulsating tissue that quickly reconstructed itself, but no longer as a human extremity. Instead, a chitinous leg with additional joints formed, characteristic of the abyssal carrion queen. The transformation didn't stop there. His torso expanded, chitinous plates emerging through the skin, his bone structure reconfiguring with wet cracking sounds. Translucent wings sprouted from his back, membranous and veined with patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. In seconds, where a child had been before, now stood a monstrous abyssal wasp. The creature that had been Han moved with unnatural fluidity, positioning itself protectively in front of Ren. Multiple compound eyes glowed with intelligence as they evaluated the abomination, which surprisingly had halted its advance. The abyssal beast seemed to detect something familiar in the energy emanating from Han. Its movement became slower, almost cautious, its multiple sensors vibrating as it analyzed this new presence. Han felt the connection immediately. Concentrating intensely, Han began releasing specific pheromones. The air around his transformed form distorted slightly. The pheromones reached the abomination, which reacted with a visible shudder. Its segments tensed, its tentacles retracted, and the multiple cores pulsed in a different rhythm, more harmonized. It was time. With a movement that combined physical gestures and chemical signals, Han issued an unequivocal command. Go down, to the natural level of us abyssals. Slowly, the beast began to retreat. With a final roar that seemed to contain as much frustration as resignation, the abomination launched itself toward one of the openings in the chamber floor, disappearing into the depths with a sound similar to a train entering a tunnel. When the abomination finally withdrew, plunging into the depths where it belonged, Han turned toward Ren. He mentally prepared himself for what would come, the look of betrayal, the horror, perhaps even contempt. The reaction any inhabitant of Yano would have upon discovering a Yino infiltrator, a monster with an abyssal beast. But what he found was something completely unexpected. Ren was standing, yes, but barely. His body swayed dangerously, his unfocused eyes staring at an indefinite point in the void. A few threads of residual light still traversed the skin, but they were rapidly fading. Run! Han took a cautious step toward him. Ren seemed to hear him through a great distance. His eyes tried to focus. His lips moved but emitted no sound. And then, like a puppet whose strings are cut, he began to collapse. Han barely had time to catch him. He examined him, noting with growing alarm the evident signs of mana poisoning. Ren's skin was pale, with an alarming grayish tint. Purplish veins marked his neck and temples, pulsing with an irregular rhythm. His pupils were dilated, and cold sweat covered his forehead. His breathing was rapid and shallow. He absorbed too much mana from the environment to generate that last ray. Han understood, recognizing the symptoms from his training. His body couldn't process it correctly. Ren needed immediate medical attention. Just when he had saved himself from being discovered, he would have to stand firm. Han made an instant decision. He would use his transformed form to fly and take Ren to the surface. Once he delivered him to professors, especially to Lin, who seemed to have such appreciation for him. Han would simply disappear. Perhaps he would fly directly to Yino, try to reach his sister Hedda before it was too late, before the consequences of his betrayal fell upon her. His mission had ended. His cover would be sacrificed to save someone who inexplicably mattered that much to him. He prepared to ascend. But then he felt it. A powerful presence was descending through the tunnel at great speed. Someone or something was approaching, and the force emanating was considerable, clearly beyond a student's level. Han retracted his transformation immediately, the instinct ingrained by years of training taking control. If it was a professor, perhaps he still had a chance to maintain his cover. There was no time for speculation. With supreme effort, Han forced the carrion queen to retreat completely, ignoring the searing pain of his returning broken leg. In seconds, his body returned to its normal student appearance, though exhaustion hit him like an avalanche. He let himself fall beside Run, feigning unconsciousness just as a figure landed gracefully in the center of the chamber. Through his half-open eyelids, Han saw Zhao. Chapter 238, Taming Aid 3. Moments before, Zhao contemplated the devastation of the colony with mixed feelings. Dozens of shadow stalker bodies lay scattered across the ground, their translucent forms gradually losing luminescence as death claimed even the last particle of their essence. His feathers were very effective in this territory, perhaps too much so. A necessary massacre, he told himself while evaluating the situation. But still, as an expert in this gathering ecosystem, Zhao understood the delicate balance. Shadow stalker colonies had their function in the natural order, keeping other more aggressive species at bay. At least the queen and her closest guards must still be alive, he thought, finding some comfort in that fact. The guardians of the royal chamber would have remained in position, protecting their monarch instead of joining the attack frenzy. It was typical behavior. The colony would eventually recover. The widow queen's pheromones would travel for miles, eventually attracting some wandering male that would allow the cycle to be reestablished. In a few months, the colony would thrive again. His reflections were interrupted by Lin. Her normally serene face showed clear signs of concern. "Professor Zhao," she said without preamble, the urgency evident in her voice. "There is much to explain, but right now the most important thing is to find Ran and Han." "What has happened?" he asked, his owl markings intensifying instinctively at the tension. "They fell through that hole," Lin explained quickly. It was some kind of illusory trap. The girls had probably already found Julius through the vibrations in the earth, although they didn't know he was here. But most likely he would first take the students back to camp, which means he's far from where Ren might be now. Lin concluded. Lin continued. "You're the fastest option to rescue them." Zhao understood the situation, and without losing another second, headed toward the opening Lin had pointed out. The illusion had been deactivated, revealing a dark well that descended vertiginously into the depths. "I'm going to find them," he declared. "Keep the students safe until I return." Zhao launched himself into the void. Air currents enveloped him as he descended, his wings controlling the speed of descent. The darkness was almost complete, but his owl provided vision even in these conditions. As he fell, his amplified senses detected something disturbing, a trail of abyssal energy, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't a stable presence, but rather an echo, as if something had been there just a moment ago and was now rapidly fading. Abyssal creatures shouldn't exist at this depth, much less in this area. The sensation briefly intensified as he continued his descent, only to dissipate completely, as if the source had disappeared or had been deliberately hidden upon sensing his power nearby. The discovery put him on maximum alert. First the worm abnormally close to the surface, then the illusory trap, and now abyssal energy. Through his half-open eyelids, Han saw Zhao. The gathering professor observed the scene with an indecipherable expression, his owl markings glowing intensely as he evaluated the situation. His gaze traveled across the destroyed chamber, the remains of the abomination segments, the pulverized crystals, the spear, the bow, and the abandoned backpacks. Finally, his eyes settled on the two boys collapsed on the ground. Han kept his breathing controlled, his body motionless, perfectly playing the role of an unconscious victim. But inside, a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts consumed him. What had Zhao sensed? Did he realize it was him that expelled abyssal energy just moments ago, or would he think it was the abomination? Would they discover him? Would Run remember what he had seen? How much time did he have before Yino discovered his betrayal and Hedda paid the price? As Zhao approached them, Han made the most difficult decision of his life. No matter what happened, he would try to maintain his cover at the probable cost of losing everything. He would pretend to be just another injured student here, hoping that Zhao would deduce that the beast was responsible for the abyssal energy. For now, he would risk a secret, but no longer out of loyalty to Yino, not out of fear. He would do it for Run. As he felt Zhao's hands checking his vital signs, Han allowed himself one last thought before falling asleep to fully commit to his role. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way to save everyone from the terrible misfortune of a war. Back to Zhao POV. When Zhao landed in the lower chamber, the vast cavern showed signs of an intense battle. Fragments of what appeared to be parts of some massive creature lay scattered, some still weakly pulsing with purple energy. Entire sections were charred, as if they had been struck by an intense energy ray. And at the center of all this destruction, two motionless figures, Run and Han, apparently unconscious, and with clear signs of having fought a desperate battle. Zhao approached. Upon reaching the boys, his concern intensified. Rin showed clear symptoms of mana poisoning. Han, for his part, didn't seem to be much better. Although he showed no signs of mana poisoning, his body was covered with cuts and bruises, and his leg was at an angle that suggested a possible fracture. Luckily, they managed to survive. But what happened here? Zhao wondered while checking their vital signs. Surely that energy I sensed was a beast. Ren's spear lay a few meters away, its tip stained with a strange fluid. The bow and several broken arrows were scattered across the floor, silent witnesses to the desperate struggle. "Hold on," he murmured as he prepared to transport them. "You're safe now." As he secured the boys to the ascent, Zhao couldn't help but cast a final evaluating glance at the chamber. Something terrible had happened here, something that shouldn't be possible at this level. Although Run and Han had survived in some miraculous way, Zhao couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, but barely the beginning of something much bigger. With that somber thought, he fully summoned a huge owl that extended his wings and began the ascent, helping him carry the two unconscious students. But Zhao also carried a growing doubt about what really lurked in the depths. He described how he had used the spear, the bow, and even a last desperate attack with the concentrated energy of his light, amplified by the Hydra's armor. His hands moved animatedly as he explained the sequence of events, tracing the trajectory of each attack in the air. However, his account ended with the ray of light, just before losing consciousness. There was no mention of Han's transformation. Han maintained his pretense of unconsciousness, but the tension in his jaw over what one might say relaxed. His breathing returned to its carefully measured rhythm. "And that's all I did," Rin finally concluded. "After launching that last attack, the mana poisoning overcame me. The next thing I knew was waking up here." Lin remained silent for several seconds, absorbing everything she had heard. The implications were staggering. A creature capable of cross-species absorption represented a threat far beyond normal ecosystem disruptions. Finally, she settled back in her seat and nodded, as if accepting the story. "Incredible," she murmured. "Absolutely incredible that you survived something like that." Rin took advantage of the pause to slightly change the subject. "How is everyone else?" "Min, Taro, the girls, everyone is fine," Lin responded, her expression softening. "Some cases of beast exhaustion, mana drainage, what's expected after a prolonged confrontation with shadow stalkers. Nothing that proper medicine and rest can't solve." She gave him an appraising look. "Though they're not monsters like you, the auxiliary healers will have to work overtime there." Lin paused, as if considering whether to add something more. Julius returned to the chamber after ensuring all students were safe. "He recovered your backpacks and belongings, and probably thoroughly investigated the scene," Rin mentally added, noticing the subtle change in Lin's tone. "The current theory," she continued, confirming Ren's suspicions, "is that this abomination, as you described it, could be a product of the last intrusion of Yino agents. Perhaps even something deliberately planned." Han's body relaxed slightly more at these words. A nearly imperceptible sigh of relief escaped his lips. What will happen with our evaluation? Ren asked, genuinely concerned about the lost time and points potentially deducted for the rescue. Lynn smiled, a flash of her usual playful personality briefly appearing. Considering the extraordinary circumstances, no points will be deducted. The presence of an abyssal beast is not a common part of the environment in which you're being evaluated. It would be unfair to penalize you for something like that. Ren felt a wave of relief wash over him. The last thing he wanted was for his companions, who had risked so much following him, to suffer academic penalties. Their trust in him had already cost him enough in his mind. So, we have a third day to obtain more materials, Ren calculated, his mind already planning how to make the most of the remaining time. New routes, potential gathering locations, and strategies began forming in his thoughts. Lin's expression turned cautious again. Not so fast, young genius. First, you'll have to answer some more questions to Zhao and Julius. As if they had been waiting for precisely that signal, the tent flap opened at that moment, revealing the two men. Zhao entered first, his owl markings glowing softly, as they always did when he was evaluating something with special attention. His eyes swept the tent with practiced efficiency. Julius followed, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes quickly scanned the tent, briefly pausing on Han before focusing on Run. Professor Zhao, Your Highness. Ren slightly inclined his head in respect. Run. Zhao nodded in response. It's good to see you awake and recovered. A remarkably rapid recovery, Julius added, especially considering the severity of the mana poisoning you presented. There was something in his tone, not quite suspicion, but a hint of curiosity that suggested he found Ren's resilience worthy of further investigation. Chapter 239, Taming Conclusions. Light filtered gradually through Ren's eyelids, a soft whitish invasion that slowly pulled him from the deep abyss of dreamless sleep. Ren opened his eyes, blinking several times to adjust his vision to prevailing brightness. A white canvas stretched above him, the inner fabric of a tent ceiling, illuminated by the morning light that managed to penetrate the partially open fabric door. The mushrooms in his hair pulsed softly, as if greeting the new day. He felt curiously renewed, as if he had slept for weeks instead of hours. His body, which he remembered on the verge of collapse after the battle with the abomination, now seemed brimming with energy, each muscle relaxed, every nerve at peace. The residual pain he had expected was conspicuously absent. Slowly, he turned his head to inspect the surroundings. He found himself in a separate compartment, smaller than the main camp tent. The air held the faint scent of medicinal herbs and clean linen. The only person present was Lin, seated on a small stool next to his cot. Her expression, normally playful, now showed an unusual seriousness, though her eyes visibly brightened when she noticed he had awakened. She leaned forward slightly, relief evident in the softening of her shoulders. On another cot nearby, just a few meters away, lay Han. His companion remained motionless, eyes closed, breathing regular. A bandage wrapped around his broken leg, and smaller dressings covered various minor wounds on his arms and face. How long? Ren began, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. Just one full night. Your recovery is monstrous, much faster than I remember, Lin responded, handing him a glass of water. It's the morning of the third expedition day. Ren drank gratefully, the fresh water dispelling the last vestiges of dryness in his throat. While he drank, Lin took a small silver bell that rested on a small table and rang it briefly. Outside the tent, hurried footsteps moved away, probably some assistant sending a message. How do you feel? Lin asked, studying him attentively, her eyes scanning for any signs of lingering illness or pain. Surprisingly well, Ren noticed 2 empty vials on a nearby tray, recognizing them as containers of good quality anti-mana medicine. I suppose that explains why I don't feel like I've been trampled by a herd of bull elephants. Lin nodded, a small smile briefly appearing on her lips. Mana poisoning. Quite severe, I might add, if Zhao hadn't found you when he did. Her voice took on a somber quality, the unspoken implications hanging heavy in the air. She left the sentence incomplete, but the message was clear. Ren, she continued, her tone changed into something more cautious, more measured. She leaned closer, lowering her voice slightly. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened down there." Rin contemplated the question for a moment, organizing his thoughts. The memories came in flashes: the fall, the chamber, the monstrous creature that defied all natural laws. Each image was vivid despite his exhaustion at the time. From his position on the other cot, Han listened attentively, although he appeared asleep. Something in the tension of his shoulders, in the too regular pattern of his breathing, started to suggest he was awake. It was an abyssal, Rin began, but not a common one. Somehow it had absorbed characteristics from all the surrounding deep beasts. Lin leaned forward, her interest clearly intensified. "What do you mean by absorbed?" "Exactly that." Rin gestured with his hands, trying to give shape to what he had witnessed. His fingers traced patterns in the air, mimicking the creature's impossible anatomy. It had characteristics from different creatures. Living tunnel plates mimic insect legs, stone lurker features. It had even assimilated part of the Shadow Stalker Queen from the colony. Lin visibly paled. The Queen? That would explain the unusually aggressive behavior of the colony. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her stool, knuckles whitening. Fortunately, it hadn't encountered a Weaver Queen, Rin continued, a shiver running down his spine at the mere thought. The image of such a creature wielding thread manipulation abilities made his blood run cold. If it had acquired their abilities to manipulate thread, we wouldn't have survived to tell the tale. Lin was clearly trying to process this information, her brow furrowed in concentration as she mentally connected dots. "Wait!" she interrupted, raising a hand. "How is it possible for a creature to absorb special abilities from such disparate species? I've never seen any abyssal with more than one ability in the hordes." "I'm not sure, but I think it was a corrupted core of a Shadow Stalker," explained Ron, his mushrooms pulsing more rapidly as he remembered. The abyssal energy that permeated it. It was as if it had corrupted its natural absorption capacity, taking it to impossible extremes. It could create illusions like an advanced mimic, absorb vitality like a Shadow Stalker. For the next few minutes, Rin detailed the battle. The creature's multiple cores, abilities, the illusion trap, how he had needed to destroy several segments before the creature finally retreated. The words flowed easily as he recounted the desperate struggle, each detail preserved with perfect clarity despite his exhaustion at the time. Chapter 240, Taming the Finals, Unit 1, 20. Rin immediately perceived the subtle interrogation hidden behind the seemingly innocuous comment. The careful emphasis Julius had placed on remarkably hadn't escaped his notice. "High-quality anti-mana medicine works wonders," he responded, maintaining a casual tone. "Besides, now that I'm a double tamer, my Hydra seems to be a very resilient creature." Julius nodded, as if the answer confirmed something he already suspected. Rin repeated the same account he had told Lin moments ago. The words flowed naturally, each detail consistent with his previous telling. "Your perspective of the events, I must admit, it is extraordinary." Julius's voice carried the weight of careful analysis, his eyes studying Ren's face for any sign of inconsistency. "I would say impossible," Zhao intervened, though without accusation in his voice, rather with genuine scientific curiosity. "A creature with the ability to absorb such disparate abilities from multiple species defies everything we know about abyssals." "And yet," added Julius, rubbing his thumb against his forefinger thoughtfully, "the remains I found in the chamber match your description perfectly." This caught Ren's attention. His mushrooms pulsed with heightened interest. "You found remains?" "Of the segments you destroyed," Julius confirmed with a single nod. "Some were still showing clear influence of abyssal energy. Sufficient to confirm your account, although many questions remain unanswered." The prince's gaze was penetrating, as if trying to see beyond Ren's words to the truth that might lie beneath. Zhao leaned slightly forward, his posture shifting from casual to focused in an instant, which brings us to the purpose of this conversation. We need to understand exactly how you survived an encounter with such a creature, how you made it flee, Ron. The implicit message was clear. Something didn't add up in the story. If Ren had lost consciousness, how had he defeated or driven away the creature? The suspicions of the ring's whereabouts and the last abyssal energy Zhao felt still not fully resolved or explained. Han tensed again, his pretense of unconsciousness becoming increasingly difficult to maintain amid the growing tension. Rin began, his mind racing through possibilities. I'm not sure, he finally admitted, his voice softening with what appeared to be genuine confusion. My last clear memory is launching that attack, with all the energy I could channel. After that, nothing certain until waking up here. Julius and Zhao exchanged a brief look, some silent communication passing between them. The canvas of the small medical tent rustled when Julius and Zhao emerged outside. The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the camp. The morning light illuminated the camp, where the remaining students prepared with renewed enthusiasm for their third day of gathering. Backpacks were being checked, tools sharpened, and plans discussed in small groups scattered throughout the area. Zhao observed the scene with a slightly envious expression. His explorer's instinct, never completely tamed by years of teaching, yearned to follow Ren's group, to document their methods, to learn their secrets. The opportunity to witness such a remarkable first-year student in action was a rare privilege that called to his scholarly heart. You can go with them, Julius commented, correctly interpreting his gaze. There's no longer any need for both of us to remain here. The prince's voice was low, almost casual, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the bustling activity around them. Zhao looked at him with surprise. Are you sure? After what happened, Julius led Zhao away from curious ears, to a small clearing near the camp boundary. His earth wolverine partially manifested, creating a subtle vibration in the ground that would interfere with any attempt to eavesdrop. The spider boy didn't do much more than send that letter with irrelevant details, Julius commented, his voice barely audible even to Zhao. As always, Zhao nodded slowly, remembering the reports he had periodically received during the past few days. Since the Seed incident, new intelligence groups had been following Han with particular interest. He wasn't the only student under surveillance, of course. Security teams kept a watchful eye on Ren during his incursions into the depths, and Julius received secondary information through Larissa, although the young noble was unaware she was indirectly providing data about Han. You were certain from that day, weren't you? Zhao asked, keeping his voice low, that Han was a spy. There were too many indicators, Julius confirmed, mainly his excessively perfect behavior. Young infiltrators often fall into that pattern. They fear standing out for doing something wrong, so they end up standing out for doing everything right. Why allow him to continue at the academy? Julius smiled slightly, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. There was a coldness to it, the calculated measure of a man long accustomed to the chess game of politics and security. A known spy has certain uses. We decided to let him believe he was going unnoticed to monitor his communications with Yino, and eventually confront him with evidence to try to extract extra information. According to Julius's explanation, the plan had been reasonable. Han's letters, carefully intercepted and copied before allowing their delivery, always followed the same pattern. Seemingly innocent messages to a sister in Yino, with small coded details interwoven in the text. Class schedules, excursion dates, basic mappings of certain areas of the campus. Hardly relevant information, Zhao murmured, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Barely the minimum to justify his role as a spy. Exactly, Julius nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Data that Yino probably already possesses through more established sources, such as the Goldcrest and other known traders. Information that would hardly change the balance of power. But Han's apparent harmlessness had led them to maintain discreet surveillance, using him as a window to understand what kind of basic information Yino handled. But recent events had cast momentary doubts on that strategy. You feared he had shown his true capabilities during the incident. Zhao understood. Julius nodded gravely. A vulnerable moment, an extreme situation, the perfect circumstances for a dormant agent to activate. He's just a child, but like Harold he could... An abyssal beast? Zhao could barely believe the possibility, despite the residual energy he had sensed during his descent. Is it really possible? Weren't they thoroughly checked? Harold was a very recent addition by the Goldcrests, wasn't he? Although Han has much older records, we can't be certain they aren't false, or that he doesn't have one. Our mechanisms for internal mana perception wouldn't detect it. Julius explained, his brow furrowing slightly. Not like they detect the core of a common second beast. It could have been hidden all this time. Even now, Zhao considered the implications. A Yino agent with an abyssal beast, infiltrated into the heart of the academy, with access to the kingdom's future elite. It was an alarming scenario. The constant supervision, and even the company of Professor in each group on this excursion made more sense in terms of resource expenditure. Lin's presence in the group should be sufficient safeguard, Julius continued, his tone measured, and his last communication, sent during one of his bathroom trips, followed the same harmless pattern as always. But everything changed too quickly, Zhao completed, understanding dawning in his eyes. And for a moment you worried you had underestimated the boy. Ren's account seems to dispel those doubts. Julius placed a hand on his chin, his expression thoughtful. But we need to be certain. Interrogate him directly when this is over. Zhao nodded, understanding the gravity of the matter. Meanwhile, I can follow the group closely during their last excursion. Even if he turns out to be as dangerous as you think he might be, he wouldn't stand a chance against a beast like mine. Zhao would finally be able to gather with Run. Julius seemed about to confirm his approval, when a flash cut through the morning sky. A swift hawk descended directly to perch on the prince's extended forearm. The bird carried a small cylinder attached to its leg. Julius unscrewed it with precise movements and extracted a tiny scroll. His expression remained inscrutable as he read the message, but Zhao, who had known him for years, could detect the tension accumulating in his shoulders. Bad news? Zhao asked, though he already knew the answer. There was an attack, Julius responded, his voice controlled but laden with gravity. We must return immediately. Chapter 241, Taming the Return. The caravan carts advanced heavily along the dirt road, their wheels creaking over occasional stones as they left the gathering territory behind. The sky stretched in an intense blue above their heads, with just a few scattered clouds offering moments of welcome shade in the midday heat. The gathering had been abruptly interrupted, to the disappointment of many students. As a concession, the professors had reduced the approval requirement to 6,000 crystals in total value, an adjustment considered fair given the lost time. But for Ren's group, this change was irrelevant. They had exceeded even the original requirements several times over. In one of the carts, sitting tightly packed between piles of gathered materials, Klein Goldcrest maintained a tense conversation with his followers. His expression oscillated between frustration and cold determination as he mentally calculated his next moves. A minimum of 150,000 points for the lowest member of that enormous group, Astor murmured, remembering the official announcements. He shook his head in disbelief. The Mushroom Boys group has shattered any first-year record, possibly of any year. Klein clenched his fists on his knees. The semester honor, that recognition he had planned to obtain as a first step toward platinum student status, seemed to be slipping through his fingers like fine sand. The legacy he had promised to uphold for his family name was being overshadowed by a brain-rotted commoner with fungi growing from his head. It's only the first unit, he replied, his voice controlled but charged with tension. There are still 4 more. I just need to surpass him in 3. Foam, seated across from him, nodded with a somber expression, especially in battle. When your lion reaches Bronze 1, you'll tear him to pieces. Exactly, Klein smiled, though the gesture didn't reach his eyes. A cold calculation resided there instead. This is just a setback, a stroke of luck that won't be repeated. Another cart, in contrast, overflowed with energy and animated conversations. The atmosphere was light despite the recent dangers they had faced, a celebration of survival and success. Too many students had crowded into it, clearly exceeding its recommended capacity, but no one seemed willing to separate from the main group. Their shared experiences had forged bonds that none wanted to break, even temporarily. Ren sat between Taro and Min, with Han facing them, his leg extended on an improvised bench of backpacks. Luna, Leora, and Larissa occupied the nearby space, while the maids and the rest of the students accommodated themselves wherever they could, creating an organized chaos of bodies and materials. Min, whose water serpent healer still had enough energy to continue working, had attended to minor injuries that persisted in several of his companions. His fingers, surrounded by a faint bluish glow, traced small bruises, accelerating their healing. "Hold still," he ordered Han while examining his fractured leg, now almost completely recovered thanks to previous treatments. Ren nodded. "Listen to men. There are still small cracks in your bone that need to seal." "I can't believe you missed almost all the action," Min continued, unable to contain a mocking smile. "Knocked out while Ren fought an abyssal abomination. What bad luck." Han merely laughed, though something in his gaze revealed an underlying tension that only Ren seemed to notice. "Bad luck, indeed," Han responded with forced lightness. "But I'm grateful that Ren saved me, though I'm sure you would have been trembling in a corner, probably wetting your pants." "The only one who doesn't control his bladder here is you," Min exclaimed indignantly, remembering the frequent pauses for relief that Han always requested during their expeditions. A wave of laughter swept through the cart, momentarily alleviating the tension accumulated from recent events. Leora, who had remained unusually quiet, looked up at the clear sky. Her normally serene face held a shadow of regret. "I can't help but regret it," she said softly. "We couldn't be of help. We didn't manage to get out of the underground by ourselves." Her comment brought a brief contemplative silence to the group. The memory of being trapped, of walls crumbling and shadow stalkers advancing, hung heavy in the air. "If it hadn't been for Julius," Maria began, leaving the sentence incomplete, but the message was clear to everyone. "Actually," Ren intervened, his mushrooms pulsing calmly as he spoke, "Lin knew that Julius was keeping watch at the camp. If you had continued digging downward as originally planned, you probably would have found Julius before the Shadow Stalker tunnels. Your quest was getting to him from the beginning. So don't worry about that." "I suppose you're right," Leora nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "He would have sensed the excavation sooner or later," Ren explained. He directed a grateful look at the group. "Though I appreciate that you took the risk of going up to try to help us more quickly. It was brave, even if dangerous." His eyes briefly scanned the faces of his companions, pausing a moment on Luna. "I wouldn't want anything to happen to any of you." Luna, surprised by the sincerity of Ren's words and his eyes' manna, blushed slightly and turned her attention to the outside landscape, feigning sudden interest in the passing trees. Mayo, closely observing the interaction, exchanged a knowing look with Matilda. "I agree with Run," added Larissa, apparently oblivious to the moment. "Though I'll definitely have a conversation with my dear brother about not mentioning to me that he would be present during our expedition." Her light tone contrasted with the calculating gleam in her eyes, suggesting that this conversation would carry much more weight than her words indicated. The chat naturally drifted toward the abrupt cancellation of the gathering. Rumors had begun to circulate as soon as the return order was given, fueled by fragmented conversations overheard among professors and the evident urgency with which Julius had departed ahead of them. "An attack," Hikari murmured. "That's what I heard one of the auxiliaries say." Her voice dropped further, glancing around to ensure no outsiders were listening. "But where?" Taro asked, leaning forward. "And by whom?" No one had concrete answers, only increasingly elaborate speculations ranging from border incursions to palace conspiracies. Theories passed from student to student, growing more outlandish with each retelling. "What concerns me," Leora intervened in a low voice, making sure that only those closest to hear her, "is how timely the attack was." Larissa nodded, immediately understanding. "Just when half of the Academy's security forces were deployed here with us." "And with Julius," Leora added. A worried silence settled among the nobles. The implications were disturbing. Someone might have warned of the relative weakness. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," Taro suggested, though without much conviction. "Perhaps," Larissa conceded, but her expression made it clear that she didn't believe in coincidences, at least not this one. Years of royal education had taught her to search for patterns and motives in seemingly random events. The car traversed an especially pronounced bump, shaking all the occupants and momentarily breaking the atmosphere of seriousness. Min lost his balance and fell onto Mira, who in turn pushed Trent, creating a domino effect of bodies and surprised exclamations. "Watch your hands," Mayo shouted, lightly hitting June's head, who had tried to stabilize himself by grabbing the first thing he found. "It was an accident," the boy protested, rubbing the point of impact. The laughter returned, temporarily dissipating the tension. Ren observed the scene with a grateful smile, valuing these moments of normalcy after the underground nightmare they had faced. Han, noticing his expression, gave him an inquisitive look. His eyes searched Ren's face with careful scrutiny. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, taking advantage of the momentary chaos for a more private conversation. Ren nodded, his mushrooms pulsing softly. "Just thinking about how fortunate we are, despite everything." Han studied his face for a moment, as if looking for some indication that Ren remembered more than he had admitted in front of the professors. But the mushroom boy's expression remained open, without a hint of suspicion or recrimination. "Yes," Han finally responded. "Very fortunate indeed." Chapter 242, Taming Change. The road continued its gradual ascent toward the city center, where the academy stood. In the distance, the main towers of the three principal schools in the castle began to take shape against the horizon, their spires catching the late afternoon sun. 200,000 points for a run, Taro commented, looking with amazement at the pile of materials they had accumulated in two adjacent carts. "Even I obtained the equivalent of 155,000 crystals. I never imagined we would get so much. And all thanks to Ren's instructions," Mira added, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "It wasn't just because of me," Ren protested, genuinely uncomfortable with the exclusive credit. "Everyone did their part helping me get fresh tentacles, and the three big guys also carrying their own weight. A great weight in skins," Min added with a grin, gesturing toward the overflowing carts trailing behind them. The conversation continued flowing animatedly in the cart as they ascended the serpentine path leading toward the city center. The familiar silhouette of the academy grew larger with each passing minute, its features becoming clearer as they approached. But something about its profile seemed wrong, a subtle disruption in its familiar symmetry. Trent was the first to notice. "Something's not right," he murmured, narrowing his eyes to better focus on the familiar silhouette of the academy towers. The conversations gradually died down as more students directed their gaze toward the horizon. "A spire is missing," Luna pointed out, her voice barely a whisper. Her finger traced the skyline, indicating the gap in the academy's crown. Indeed, one of the spires that crowned the east tower had disappeared, leaving an irregular stump where it once rose elegantly. But that wasn't all. The section near the western cave. Leora leaned forward, her face pale, will-o'-wisp flickering briefly around her fingertips. "It's burned." A large black stain, like a scar on the academy's skin, covered part of the western wing. Even from a distance, the movement of workers could be distinguished as small figures repairing the damage. "The school has been attacked," Larissa finally articulated, verbalizing what everyone had already understood. A dense silence settled in the carriage. Students exchanged worried glances, some thinking of friends or family who had been in classes these days, others contemplating the unexpected vulnerability of what they considered an impregnable sanctuary. The rattling of the wheels seemed to intensify in the silence, marking a somber cadence as they continued their inexorable, gentle ascent toward a wounded academy. Lynn must have perceived the growing unease in the carriage. She approached, her mount trotting slowly to keep pace with the vehicle. Her expression was serious but controlled, like someone bearing bad news but who has found a balance to convey them. "We recently received a message from Julius," she announced, her clear voice cutting through the tension. "The academy is secure now. Wei and Zhao are informing the other carriages what I'll tell you." Her presence seemed to bring some normalcy to the situation, an anchor amid the uncertainty. "What exactly happened?" Taro asked, his eyes fixed on the evidence of the attack that became increasingly clear with proximity. Lynn took a deep breath, carefully weighing her words. "There was an attack from Yino agents," she began. "The Ashenway family sent reinforcements by direct order of my Aunt Selphra as soon as they received news. The castle could allocate few personnel, due to other situations requiring attention. The Gold Crest also sent support." The subtle emphasis Lynn placed on the word didn't go unnoticed by Larissa, who narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. Political nuances rarely escaped her attention. "And the Star Weavers?" Luna asked, thinking of her own family. They couldn't send anyone. Lynn responded with neutrality. Lack of available personnel, as I understand it. But the combination of forces was sufficient. She continued. The attackers were repelled and the academy is now under control. Repairs began immediately. Men, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. They must have been many to cause so much damage. A complete battalion from Yino. Lynn shook her head, and her response left everyone momentarily speechless. 2, she said simply. Only 2 attackers. Exclamations of disbelief followed immediately. How was it possible that only 2 individuals had inflicted such destruction on an institution protected by dozens of teachers and guards? Taking advantage of the moment of general confusion, Lynn discreetly approached Run. Leaning slightly, she murmured in a voice low enough that only he could hear. It seems the target was the Seed. They retreated when they couldn't locate the bearer of the relic, and when reinforcements finally overcame their combined power. Ren nodded imperceptibly, the implication crystalline in his mind. Secrets are bad manners, Lynn. Larissa's melodious but firm voice cut through the moment. Nothing escaped her notice, especially not whispered conversations that excluded her. Lynn straightened, a resigned smile appearing on her lips. You're right. In any case, you'll all find out soon. There's no point in hiding things. Turning her attention back to the group in general, Lynn adopted a more formal tone. Her expression became graver, and Ren noticed how her shoulders tensed slightly, preparing to share even more difficult news. During the battle, there were casualties. The carriage seemed to sink into absolute silence, as if even the sound of the wheels and the wind had been absorbed by the gravity of those words. Most were auxiliaries who fought underground where the investigation of the last incident continued. Lynn said, her voice professionally controlled, but with an underlying tone of pain. Probably few or none that you knew personally from the majority of you. She paused, and Ren instinctively knew that the worst was yet to come. The momentary hesitation in Lynn's usually confident demeanor told him more than words could. We also lost 2 teachers. Min's hands unconsciously clutched the edge of his seat, while Taro closed his eyes as if preparing himself for the impact. The others held themselves rigidly, bracing for news they didn't want to hear. One of them taught classes to you. Lynn's voice descended to little more than a whisper. Professor Song, crystal instructor, fell valiantly defending a group of students. The news fell like a stone slab. Professor Song, with his contagious enthusiasm for crystals and his characteristic good nature, had been a pleasant presence during the short time they had known him. His optional class, though not mandatory, had been a breath of peace amid the rigorous curriculum of the academy. For many, he was barely an acquaintance, a friendly face they crossed in the hallways. For others, a mentor who had dedicated extra time to explain the mysteries of crystals after class. But for all, his loss represented a fissure in the shield of security that the academy symbolized. Death had reached into their sanctuary, shattering the illusion of perfect safety. It can't be, Mira murmured, tears forming in her eyes. Just 3 days ago, he was so excited showing me how to identify mana crystals from the incursions with Ryan. Several students lowered their heads, some regretting not having attended or paid more attention in his classes. Others remembering gestures of kindness that now took on special weight. Memories of the professor's gentle correction, his patient explanations, his genuine passion for teaching crystallized into a collective grief. Ren observed the reactions around him, particularly Hans. The boy had become completely still, his face a pale, expressionless mask that contrasted with the emotionality of the rest. There were no tears, not even visible shock, but something deeper and more complex, an absolute stillness that spoke of more intense shock than any external manifestation. Are you okay? Ren asked quietly. Chapter 243, Tamer King. The director's office had lost its characteristic aura of formal dignity. In the center, Director Ignatius remained seated. His face, normally serene and authoritative, showed the weariness of someone who looked death directly in the eyes. His phoenix was partially manifested, both from defensive instinct and the need to accelerate his own healing. But it was the absence of healing that proved most shocking. Where his left leg should have been, only an empty space remained beneath the carefully folded fabric of his trousers. The legendary regeneration of a specific beast would allow him to recover the limb eventually, but the attackers had ensured its destruction to an excessive degree, beyond what even a phoenix could quickly repair. Victor Dravenholm, Julius's older brother, occupied a nearby armchair, his usual royal attire replaced by bandages covering much of his torso and right arm. Blood had seeped through in places, creating dark patterns against the white gauze. His face, so similar to Julius's but marked by more years of combat, showed an intensity of tension more severe than usual. The triples proved more powerful than we anticipated, the director was explaining to Julius, his voice maintaining admirable composure considering his circumstances. It wasn't just their individual strength, but their synergies as if the enhancements were retroactive. Julius absorbed the scene with the analytical meticulousness that characterized him. The devastation evident in these two powerful men sent a chill through him, but he kept his expression neutral. Real triples? Victor turned toward his younger brother, a weary smile briefly appearing on his face. Tamers with 3 beasts at the same time indeed. A facet of Yino we would prefer never to know. Impossible? Julius responded automatically. In their experiments, they could never withstand the strain of managing 3 cores. Evidently, the director interrupted, gesturing toward his absent leg. They have found a way. Victor sat up slightly, wincing in pain when the movement tensed the bandages on his chest. I believe the secret is the power of the main beast. Each carried a gold beast as a base. 1 gold, 1, the other gold, 2. Despite both secondary beasts being only silver, 3. The synergies with the Abyssals gave them many unexpected combinations. The enhancement percentages multiplied with each other, the director continued. Combinations of abilities that no traditional tamer could achieve. The director paused, his gaze involuntarily drifting toward his missing leg, a momentary lapse in his otherwise perfect composure. Julius remained silent, processing the information. The implications were staggering. If Yino had successfully developed stable triple tamers, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. What was their objective? He finally asked, though he suspected the answer already. The seed! Victor and the director responded in unison, exchanging a significant look. The word hung in the air between them, laden with implications. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the softening of the healer's energy. They knew exactly what they were looking for, and that the Academy was lightly guarded these days. Which leads us to wonder, the director tilted his head slightly, how did they obtain that information so fast? The gold crests, Victor growled, his voice loading with bitterness. They're infiltrated even into the walls of this institution. The director neither confirmed nor denied the accusation, but his silence was eloquent. I barely arrived in time to help Ignatius, Victor continued, unconsciously rubbing his injured shoulder. Professor Song and Professor Jasiba had already fallen. Julius knew both professors. Song, with his contagious enthusiasm for crystallography. Jasiba, stern but fair, an expert in beasts of the second ring, deaths that left a void impossible to fill. He could picture Song's animated explanations, Jasiba's precise corrections, now silence forever. And the abyssal beast certainly didn't help, added Victor, his frustration clear. The auxiliaries and the rest of the teaching staff were busy evacuating students and containing abyssal leaks. A muscle tensed in Victor's jaw as he continued. If those bastards from the castle were more efficient in their damn functions, if our dear siblings were less concerned with politics and more with actual security. He interrupted himself, as if suddenly remembering Julius's presence. But mainly, his voice descended to a dangerously low tone. If we could root out the real problem, the gold crests and their treachery. Victor, the director's tone contained a veiled warning. Be careful what you say aloud, even here. Why? Do you fear the walls have ears, Ignatius? Victor let out a bitter laugh. They probably do, but it wouldn't matter. Julius remained still, observing the exchange. If the old man were here instead of wasting valuable resources and time, Victor finally continued, chasing fantasies on the diamond line, while Yino moves its pieces here. But he isn't, said Ignatius. Victor, did you reach the 6th ring with him? Julius asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Victor sighed heavily. Don't ask, brother. Julius's curiosity, however, could not be so easily deflected. Since you arrived, you've been hiding it. I want to try contacting him again. Were you at least able to follow him? Do you know where he is now? A dry laugh escaped Victor. Follow him? The gold. 3-ring was already dangerous even for me, little brother. Platinum. 1 is a constant dance with death for anyone who isn't him. I found him resting there just by luck. Victor leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. But Platinum, too, has held itself Julius. Trying to follow him to the edge of the diamond level would have been suicide, even for me, but if you want to try, go ahead. He should still be in the Central Territories artery, the 4th one. The mention of the diamond ring made Julius visibly tense. It was legendary territory, home to the youngest dragons whose power already surpassed human comprehension. The mere idea that their father was tempting that limit, and you tried to convince him? Victor shook his head. A waste of time. You know how he is. Oh yes, Julius knew. Dragarian Dravenholm, king of Yano, was known for his legendary stubbornness as much as for his impossible feats. Once he set a goal, not even the gods themselves could dissuade him. But has he achieved something at least? Julius asked, trying to find some hope in the situation. Victor seemed to hesitate, as if considering whether he should share certain information. Finally, he nodded slowly. He already has 2 minor rings, he admitted, his voice barely audible. A torrent of emerald energy tore through the clearing, vaporizing rocks and turning the air itself into greenish fire. The dragon's breath, concentrated like a living laser, transformed everything in its path into an extreme explosion of life. Particles of pure essence scattered in its wake, refracting the surrounding light into cascading prisms. Where it touched the earth, vegetation emerged with uncontrolled violence, not simple plants, but botanical monstrosities that joined the battle. Dragarian rolled under the beam, feeling the heat that threatened to steal his vitality brush against his back as carnivorous trees instantly sprouted from the charred soil. He rose with the fluidity of a predator, adjusting the feathered gauntlet protecting his right hand, a defense torn from the claws of a flame griffin in the depths of the 2nd platinum ring. The gauntlet glowed with residual fire, embers dancing between the golden feathers. "Damn it! You're too persistent for a lazy-ass skipper," exclaimed Drag. A savage smile illuminated his weathered face as he dodged another burst of the arboreal breath. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of combat, a hunter facing worthy prey. The king of Yano bore no resemblance to the traditional image of a monarch. No crown adorned his unkempt hair, cut irregularly as if he himself had taken a knife to keep it out his eyes. His clothes, though of exquisite quality, showed evident signs of countless battles. Patches made during campaigns, acid burns, and the characteristic discoloration produced by toxins from beasts of 4th ring in this latitude. Mud caked his boots, and various implements hung from his belt, tools of survival rather than symbols of office. His weathered skin told the story of a life spent under harsh conditions, far from the comforts of court and castle. Chapter 244, Taming the Dragon Tree. The wind howled among the enormous trees, over 300 meters tall, that marked the boundary between the possible and the impossible. Here, at the edge of the Diamond Ring Forest, the air itself seemed charged with a different energy, denser, more ancient. Sunlight refracted into millions of fragments as it passed through the enormous crystalline mountain that rose like a silent guardian between 2 worlds. The platinum ring that the strongest humans could traverse, and the diamond ring, where only dragons reign without dispute. Inside the mountain lay the ring, one of the 10 he needed. 3 rings gleamed on his left hand, each emitting a distinct radiance. The first was the original ring from the center of Yano, extracted from the first seed. The other 2, one of aquamarine crystal and another of twisted metal that seemed to trap current of air, were trophies from past victories against young dragons, guardians of mana arteries similar to this one. The dragon tree, an impossible creature that guarded the entrance to the crystal mountain, rose like a vegetal nightmare 100 meters tall. It was a guardian of Yano's central point, protector of one of the 7 mana arteries where the internal distribution icosahedron touched the surface. It wasn't a simple tree shaped like a dragon, but a living nexus, a central point from which the mountain guardian exercised its dominion. Twisted branches extended like gigantic arteries, each delineating a draconian feature composed entirely of living wood and leaves sharp as razors. From the exposed roots constantly emerged the guardian servants, bark knights, humanoid warriors formed with harder than iron, wielding swords of vegetal obsidian. Dark hollows in their faces emitted a greenish glow. The dragons were animating these constructions without minds of their own. At the center of this vegetal maelstrom, Drag moved with the confidence and agility of someone who has danced with death too many times to fear it. His movements were precise, calculated after decades of facing beasts much more powerful than himself. 21 attempts, he murmured to himself as his eyes evaluated the dragon tree's attack pattern. And each time your forest grows more impressive. I almost feel flattered by the effort. With a fluid movement, Drag activated his earth Qilin. His legs fused, elongating and filling with scales, while crystalline horns sprouted from his temples, shimmering with pure elemental power. The stone beneath his hooves reverberated, responding to his will. Simultaneously, the 3 rings on his left hand began to glow with increasing intensity. The first, forged of the primordial metal of the original seed, emitted a pulse of white light. The second, wrenched from the water dragon after a 3-day battle in the depths of Great Lake, shone with a deep blue that evoked the abyssal trenches. The third, trophy of his victory against the wind dragon, seemed to contain a miniature hurricane, constantly spinning within its crystalline structure. Drag channeled the power of the second ring, and the air around him lost its moisture. With a gesture, he manipulated this energy toward the bark knights advancing toward him, drying their bodies until each of their movements crackled with desiccation. "Let's see how well your toys move when they're thirsty," he smiled, as his azure dragon responded to his call. The transformation of his arms was instantaneous, bluish scales covering his skin while his fingers elongated into claws that gleamed with a blue radiance. With a roar that rivaled the dragon's own, Drag launched himself against the knights. He didn't fight like a duelist, nor like a soldier. He moved like a force of nature. The dragon tree perceived the threat and responded. It inhaled deeply, its wooden chest expanding before releasing concentrated jets of sap that melted stone on contact. Drag activated the third ring, and the wind around him violently swirled, forming a cyclonic shield that deflected the projectiles. In response, the dragon tree deployed its most lethal card. From its central trunk emerged a figure that made even Drag momentarily pause. An amber knight, 3 times larger than the bark ones. Its body formed not of simple wood, but fossilized resin that shone with the dragon's concentrated power. In its hands, it wielded a halberd whose blade was a petrified dragon fang, powerful enough to cleave even the scales of a platinum tamer. "Oh, this is new," murmured Drag, all mockery leaving his voice as he evaluated this new opponent. Finally, something interesting. The amber knight advanced with surprising speed for its size, its halberd tracing a deadly arc that would have decapitated the king if not for centuries of refined instincts. Drag ducked under the attack, rolling forward and inside the colossus's reach, where its size played against it. His blue claws struck with precision against the giant's joints, seeking weak points in the fossilized resin. To his surprise, the amber resisted, barely scratching. "Interesting," Drag smiled, genuinely impressed while dodging a descending punch that fractured the ground. "This will take a long time." With a fluid movement, Drag simultaneously activated all 3 rings. The combined power made the light around him distort, adding 200% to all his capabilities. His earth Qilin manifested completely, covering his lower half with living armor, while his azure dragon enveloped his arms and torso in blue scales. The fusion of elements created a hybrid appearance, neither fully dragon nor Qilin, but something uniquely powerful. The dragon tree roared, this time emitting a sound that shook the mountain itself. From the depths of the surrounding forest emerged more wooden creatures. Drag extended his dragonized arm, channeling his own vegetal energy. With a dragon's breath created aggressive and lethal trees, Drag's azure dragon commanded wood with precision. The roots at the feet of the soldiers began to burrow, responding to a different will, fighting against the dragon's control. It was a battle of domains. 2 similar powers confronted in a duel of wills. The dragon, irritated by the interference, released its breath over an enormous area. A cloud of green energy erupted from its jaws, floating like living mist toward Drag. Drag covered himself. Immediately, small sprouts began to form on his coat, trying to root themselves in his flesh. Each seedling pulsed with the dragon's essence, seeking to transform him into another servant. With a gesture of annoyance, Drag tore off the incipient plants and activated the wind ring. The air around him purified instantly, neutralizing the residual effects of the draconic breath. "Always the same trick," he commented, standing up straight. "I expected something more creative after almost a year." The Guardian's entire army, summoned to stop a single man. Drag inhaled deeply, focusing on the sensation of the rings against the skin. With each visit, with each attempt, he had learned more about the dragon's defenses, cataloging weaknesses, observing patterns. "This time," he murmured, more to himself than to the Guardian, who couldn't hear him, "this time will be different." From his position, he could see the entrance to the crystalline cavern, where the third minor ring, the fourth ring that would fall into his power, awaited. Inside, somewhere in the depths, would be the next artifact he needed, not for glory, not for power, but out of desperate necessity. Time was running out, and without the 7 rings, everything, his kingdom, his people, perhaps the world itself, would be lost. With a cry that contained decades of unbreakable determination, Drag launched himself against the arboreal army, his fused beast shining like a beacon of impossible defiance against the power of a dragon. The battle for the 4th ring had begun. Chapter 245, Taming the Future. "Father already has 2 minor rings," Victor admitted, his voice barely audible. Julius couldn't hide his surprise. "2? I thought diamond-ranked dragons were invincible. And why hadn't you told me?" "Because Father didn't want to give false hope to you all," Victor replied, reclining again in his armchair. Pain flickered across his face as the movement disturbed his wounds. "You know how he is with these things. He doesn't want to promise anything until he's certain. But it seems his Cheelan's elemental advantage was just enough to defeat the water dragon, and the wood element advantage of his azure dragon was also enough to defeat the wind one. So he's made progress those last years," Julius reflected, a spark of hope igniting within him. Perhaps the situation wasn't as dire as it seemed. "Yes," Victor conceded, "but time runs against us if Yino gets more of those soldiers. By the time he obtains all 7 minor rings, it could be too late, and with one of the 3 major rings lost." The phrase hung in the air, laden with somber implications. The director, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally intervened. "What we need now is to focus on finding it. It must not fall into Yino's hands." Julius nodded, but his mind was working in another direction. As the king's youngest son, he had always occupied a peculiar position. He wasn't the principal heir like his older brother. This position certainly had its disadvantages, but also unique advantages. Their father had always maintained a special connection with him, one that sometimes transcended protocol. An idea began forming in his mind. "Perhaps I can send Father a message," he suggested carefully, "something that might make him reconsider his priorities." Victor looked at him skeptically. "And you think he'll listen to you when he ignored my direct petitions and those of the entire council?" A small smile appeared on Julius's face. "Maybe he left me an option." Victor shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement in his exhausted expression. "Go ahead, try. Things can't get worse." Director Ignatius, observing the exchange between the brothers, seemed to find a moment of relief amid the chaos surrounding them. His phoenix briefly brightened, responding to the small spark of hope. "Meanwhile," Victor continued, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, "we must reorganize our defenses. The triples might return, and next time we'll be prepared." "Are you okay?" Ren asked quietly. Hans seemed to slowly return from some distant place. He blinked, as if struggling to focus on immediate reality. His eyes had a haunted quality to them, seeing something beyond the present moment. "Yes," he responded mechanically, just surprised. But Ren noticed how Hans' fingers trembled slightly, the only crack in his facade of controlled indifference. The carriage finally entered the inner boundaries of the academy. The damaged towers loomed closer now, the destruction more evident at this proximity. Workers could be seen on scaffolding, some using earth and wind magic to repair the structural damage, others clearing debris. Lynn excused herself to return to the front of the caravan, leaving the students to process the news. The festive atmosphere from just hours ago had transformed into solemn contemplation about the fragility of what they considered permanent. The weight of loss settled over them like a heavy blanket. Upon arrival, they would normally have distributed materials and celebrated the passing scores. But it wasn't so this time. They sent the students to their rooms. The auxiliaries would handle distributing things later. Priorities had shifted in the wake of the attack. Hans seemed to want to say something as they walked toward the dormitories, his gaze oscillating between Run and the ground. His fingers closed and opened rhythmically, as if rehearsing grasping words from the air. However, before he could decide, a figure in the uniform of administrative auxiliaries approached the group. The woman moved with crisp efficiency, her expression professionally neutral. Students Han and Lady Larissa, your presence is required immediately in the director's office. The rest of the group exchanged looks of surprise and concern. Whispers immediately began circulating among them. Did they do something wrong? Min asked, earning an elbow from Taro. The auxiliary maintained her neutral expression. It's just protocol. The rest should go to their dormitories until further notice. Han cast a final glance at Ren before following the auxiliary along with Larissa, who bid farewell with a reassuring gesture. What was that about? Taro murmured as the group resumed their path toward the dormitories. Extra interrogation, probably, Leora responded. Larissa is a representative of the royal family, and Han, well, they didn't have much time to question him during the trip because of the abrupt cancellation, and they might think he possibly saw something relevant during his fall in the expedition. Ren remained silent, watching Han's figure recede into the distance. Upon reaching the first-year dormitories, Ran, Min, and Taro found Lu organizing his notes on the table. His face momentarily brightened upon seeing them enter, but his expression quickly changed upon noticing their countenances. I guess you've already heard, he said by way of greeting. We saw when we arrived, Taro responded, dropping his backpack with an exhausted sigh. The East Tower. Lu nodded gravely. They say it was an underground attack first. They were looking for something on the seed. His gaze briefly rested on Run, who was already heading toward his eggs, apparently indifferent to the conversation. His mushrooms, however, pulsed with a pattern that suggested intense mental activity. The eggs showed signs of normal development, although Ren immediately noticed that progress had halted during his absence. Unfortunately, Lu had managed to replicate the rune. The delicate and complex energy pattern required Ren's specific understanding. In any case, it wasn't serious. The crystalline structure remained stable, and the cores maintained their integrity. 2 days without his direct attention only meant 2 days less of energy accumulation. Did Lin or Zhao tell you anything else? Lu asked while Ren meticulously examined each egg. He leaned forward, eager for information beyond the official announcements. Only sad news, Min replied, collapsing onto his bed. The exhaustion of the journey and emotional toll of recent revelations weighed heavily on him. Lu lowered his head. The professors and auxiliaries protected us valiantly. While the others shared what little they knew about the attack, Rin carefully extracted the shadow stalker tentacles he had collected. Their condition was optimal, thanks to the bark stalker blood he had used as a preservative after obtaining them. With precise movements, he began finishing their processing before they lost potency in man. And what did you see? Taro asked Lu, while observing Rin work. Lu shrugged. Not much, really. They evacuated us to the underground shelter almost immediately. We felt tremors. His voice grew lower. Afterward, we learned what it was when some abyssals emerged on the lower level. The professors contained them. A heavy silence fell over the room. The reality of the losses, the fragility of the security they had taken for granted, settled in their minds like a stone slab. Ren, though apparently absorbed in his work, processed all the information. His mind was far from the mechanical task at hand. The academy needs more strength, he thought, evaluating options. Lin and Zhao may obtain their beasts soon, but that wouldn't be enough against triples with gold level. The solution was evident, though it would require considerable resources. More eggs, more beasts for promising students. And he needed to begin immediately. Chapter 246, Taming Honor. The solution was evident, though it required considerable resources. More eggs, more beasts for promising students. And he needed to begin immediately. After finishing processing the tentacles, Rin dedicated some time to his daily cultivation. The light of his mushrooms acquired that characteristic bluish tone while he channeled energy. Min and Taro imitated him shortly afterward, each focused on their own techniques. Liu, having completed his routine in the morning, continued with his studies without paying much attention. Lin didn't seem likely to appear to supervise today's exercise, which wasn't surprising considering the circumstances. Rin took advantage of this absence to extract 3 more cores from his now abundant personal reserve. When his companions finished their cultivation, Rin silently headed toward the door. "Where are you going?" Min asked, looking up from his meditation position. "Exchange warehouse," Rin responded succinctly. "I'll be back soon." "But they told us to—" Taro began, concern evident in his voice. Rin merely smiled, his mushrooms pulsing with quiet determination. "I won't be long." Upon arrival, he found the special materials section still active, with Jessie nervously organizing several scrolls behind the counter. She was sorting through the chaotic aftermath of the Academy's disruption. "Ren!" the young woman exclaimed upon seeing him, her cat ears moving with surprise. "You shouldn't be here." "I need some specific materials," he responded directly. "It's important." Jessie seemed to hesitate, but something in Ren's expression must have convinced her. The intensity in his eyes, perhaps, or the unusual urgency in his typically measured demeanor. "Well, I suppose I can make an exception. What are you looking for?" She pulled a ledger toward her, ready to check inventory. "Cheap Wind Links Parts, 5. Ren began, mentally consulting his list. Jessie quickly reviewed the inventory. "We have some cheap iron rank ones." Her fingers traced down the columns of her ledger. Professor Zhao's auxiliary had a specimen. They're not very common, but not excessively rare either. After verifying price, Ren nodded. 500 crystals was reasonable for a component of that quality. "I also need 5 demonic bash parts," he continued. Jessie's eyes widened slightly. "That's quite unusual. We only have as the lowest the bronze, 1 rank, and they're considerably more expensive." "How much?" Ren asked, mentally preparing himself. 5,000 crystals for the complete set. Ren made an internal grimace. It was undoubtedly a higher sum since they weren't iron rank, but the expedition had been extraordinarily productive. He could afford it. The bash components would provide the perfect balance of stealth and power for what he had planned. "And finally," he continued, "I need components of the celestial white tiger. Its initial form, the striped light cat." This time, Jessie seemed genuinely surprised. "That's extremely rare, Run. Even more than the bash. Do you have anything?" "Yes, but—" Jessie consulted the registry again. 20,000 crystals, and that's with your luck being generous, because they're only bronze. 1 rank. Normally, there's nothing that isn't silver since the Starweavers control that market. Rin calculated quickly. Between the price of the materials and what he would need for other components of process, he was spending an amount that would have sounded substantial to him before. But he remembered Luna, her support since that first day. Despite her occasionally overwhelming insistence, she had proven to be an ally and a good person. "I'll take it," he finally decided. "All of it. Is that everything?" "Yes, please," Rin affirmed. With the carefully wrapped packages under his arm, Rin returned to the dormitories. His mind was already designing the additional nests. The next day, the great hall had been transformed for the occasion. Black banners hung from the walls, replacing the Academy's usual vibrant colors. The students, organized by year, remained in perfect formations, all dressed in simple black robes over their uniforms. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional quickly suppressed sob. On the main stage, portraits of the fallen had been placed. 23 frames in total. 2 professors and 21 auxiliaries and support staff who were underground at the time of the first attack. A devastating figure compared to the single casualty of the previous attack. Director Ignatius slowly advanced toward the center of the stage, leaning on a richly carved staff. His physical absence was painfully evident. Where he once stood with majestic presence, he now moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose equilibrium has been fundamentally altered. The empty space where his left leg should have been seen to draw eyes despite the flowing robes designed to disguise it. His phoenix was partially manifested, the golden reddish glow pulsing softly under his skin, accelerating a healing process that would take months even with the best treatments. "We gather today," he began, his voice projecting clearly despite his evident fatigue, "to honor those who gave their lives protecting this institution's fundamental principles, knowledge, honor, and, above all, the future that each of you represent." Ren observed from his position among the first-year students. His mushrooms barely pulsed, maintaining a silent respect for the moment. Beside him, Min kept his head bowed, while Taro stared straight ahead, his jaw tense with contained emotions. A little further away, Han remained absolutely motionless, his face a stone mask that contrasted with the open sadness of those around him. Since his return from the interrogation, he had maintained a subtle but perceptible distance, as if fearing to contaminate them with something invisible he carried. Occasionally, his eyes would dart to Run, then quickly away, as if unable to maintain contact. The director continued with the ceremony, individually naming each of the fallen, while a small flame was lit above their corresponding portrait. It was an ancient Yano tradition. The flame symbolized the spirit's passage to the great mana cycle, released from earthly bonds. The additional presences at the ceremony didn't go unnoticed by Run. Guards from noble families, recognizable by their heraldic insignia, lined the walls. Castle personnel, with their characteristic dark blue uniforms, occupied strategic positions near the exits. And Julius, standing at one end of the stage. His face betrayed no emotion, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes about his awareness of continuing threat. The academy had fortified itself, preparing for another attack that everyone feared might be repeated. When the ceremony concluded with a minute of absolute silence, the students were released to attend their regular classes, an attempt to reinstate normalcy amid the recent chaos. The crowd dispersed slowly, many lingering near the portraits to pay personal respects. Ren stood for a moment next to the portrait of a guard, the one who normally stood at the entrance of the cave at midday and affectionately called him Lucky Shroom. "Looks like we'll have Zhao for crystallography," Min commented as they headed toward their first class. His voice was kept low, as if speaking normally would somehow dishonor the somber mood. "Temporarily," Taro added, "until they find a permanent replacement." The news didn't surprise Ron. Zhao was one of the few professors with knowledge broad enough, and now also free time, thanks to Julius, to cover multiple subjects, although his specialty was exterior gathering. Upon entering the crystallography classroom, normally half empty as it was an optional subject, they found the space completely full. Students who previously showed barely any interest now occupied every available seat, their faces solemn and notebooks open. It seemed Professor Song's sacrifice had accomplished what his passion for teaching could not. Filling his classroom, Zhao entered punctually, his expression slightly uncomfortable at finding the overcrowded classroom. His owl markings and feathers seemed more pronounced today, perhaps reflecting his heightened alertness. "Good morning," he began, quickly adapting to the situation. "As you know, I will be covering this class until an appropriate successor is designated for Professor Song." He paused, letting the name float in the air for a respectful moment. For those joining the subject belatedly, I must clarify that the requirements for passing haven't changed. A minimum quantity of crystals collected from the mine is needed, which most of you have already fulfilled during your regular incursions. Several students visibly relaxed at this confirmation. However, Zhao continued with a slight smile, this doesn't exempt you from a theoretical exam, which constitutes 50% of your final grade. Chapter 247, Double Tamer, 3rd. However, Zhao continued with a slight smile, this doesn't exempt you from a theoretical exam, which constitutes 50% of your final grade. A murmur of discontent spread through the classroom, primarily from the newly incorporated students who had hoped for an easy pass. For Run, however, the news presented no problem whatsoever. His enhanced processing capacity, a product of his fusion with the ring, allowed him to assimilate information at a rate that bordered on superhuman. The mushrooms in his hair pulsed with quiet confidence as he reviewed his mental catalog of crystallographic knowledge. He had already memorized practically the entire syllabus, extracting knowledge from textbooks and notes borrowed from Min and Taro. He wouldn't need to present a thesis specialized in his beast, either, since Wei had already approved him, despite his mushroom having reached bronze rank. Fulfilling another of the possible requirements, it was very difficult to demonstrate that this was the case and not incorrect maturation. The only obstacle to officially verify this rank was that his core remained abnormally small, even tinier than that as Hydra, despite technically being his main beast. A specialized crystal could see his interior cores, but the mushrooms would still not reach the minimum size of a bronze one. The 20% increases his mushroom had managed to obtain also fell far below traditional standards. A bronze 1 rank beast should provide a minimum 60% increase in its main attribute and a maximum of 100%. The true advantage of my beast is being able to obtain multiple beasts. Ren reflected as Zhao began the lesson. I could explain to them in detail, but having them believe I have simply taken a potion is convenient for now. The idea of having to explain to Julius, the director, or any of the intimidating adults of the academy how his beast really worked seemed an unnecessary risk. The obtained potion provided the perfect shield, a reasonable explanation that required no further questioning. At the end of class, Ren caught Klein's gaze, laden with barely contained frustration. The Gold Crest heir must have already understood that it was too late to surpass him in this subject. In his eyes, Ren had practically lived underground the entire semester, giving him an unfair advantage in crystal collection. His only hope would be to obtain a perfect grade in Mei's class, tie with Ren in Wei's, and then defeat him decisively in the battle class, both in individual and team modalities. Since the combat subject carried more weight than the theoretical ones, he could still snatch the semester honor, a logical plan considering he would soon be bronze 1. The lion's increased power would give him a significant edge in combat scenarios, but it didn't contemplate that Ren already had more total increases than the 80% Klein would obtain. The Mushroom Boy's hidden advantages remained precisely that for him, hidden. In the following days, classes gradually resumed their normal rhythm. Han and Larissa fully reincorporated after their interrogations, and although Han initially seemed uncomfortable, especially around Ren, he slowly began to relax again in the group's presence. Whatever had been discussed in the director's office remained private, but the tension in Han's shoulders had visibly decreased with each passing day. Ren's group's incursions into the depths were temporarily suspended, diverting the boys' attention toward theoretical preparation. Ren took advantage of this time to work on his eggs and his cultivation. Upon returning to the dormitories after the day's classes, they found surprise. The auxiliaries had finally delivered all the materials collected during the expedition. Carefully labeled packages occupied every available space. Piles of shadow stalker skins, bark stalker parts, and other materials. The room now resembled a warehouse more than a living space, with barely visible paths between the beds. Where were we supposed to sleep? Min asked, contemplating the now crowded room with amazement. We can process and sell them for a bigger cash out, but first we'll need to reorganize, Ren suggested, already evaluating how to use the vertical space. All this is really just ours. Taro asked, incredulous. Most of it is mine, Ren admitted. But don't worry, I'll find someone to store it. The next day, Zhao made the official announcement of the expedition grades in front of the entire class. As expected, Ren's group topped the list with astronomical values that made the efforts of the rest of the students seem ridiculous. And with these results, Zhao concluded, his owl markings brightening with what seemed like pride, it is established that Ren Patender obtains first place in the practical gathering unit. A murmur ran through the classroom, although everyone had anticipated this result. Hearing it officially transformed it into an inescapable reality. Jean and Klein exchanged somber looks. What they had feared was confirmed. Run, the boy with the supposedly weakest beast, had secured the first official academic victory, consolidated his position as the most outstanding student of the semester so far. The Mushroom Boy's trajectory continued to defy all expectations. Klein clenched his fists under his table. His plan to obtain the semester honor was becoming increasingly complicated. The path to proving the Gold Crest superiority was narrowing with each achievement from the common-born student. Classes continued their normal course. Julius had remained at the academy for a few more days after the attack, dedicating himself to a meticulous underground investigation. According to circulating rumors, he had found no traces of the attackers, who had apparently retreated wounded, disappearing as mysteriously as they had arrived. The school returned to complete normalcy, but today, things in the boys' room had spiraled out of control. Min jumped in the dormitory with eyes bulging with excitement. "It's moving! Run, it's moving!" he exclaimed, gesturing toward his nest. "They don't move, relax." Ren approached Min's nest and examined the new fully formed egg. A faint bluish glow pulsed from within. "It's ready," he confirmed, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Call it." Min nodded nervously and extended his hand. When he made contact, a brief light connected the creature with Min, and the bond was established. He concentrated, briefly closing his eyes, and when he opened them, the egg emitted a more intense flash. His excitement was palpable, the culmination of weeks of anticipation. The four observed in silence as the creature inside struggled to free itself. Finally, with a decisive crack, the shell split and a gelatinous substance spilled over the nest. The scent of fresh water filled the air. In the midst of the fluid, barely visible, floated what appeared to be a transparent tadpole the size of a rabbit. Its internal organs, faintly visible through its translucent skin, pulsed with a constant rhythm. Two small black eyes rotated independently, examining its new environment. Min extended his hand tremblingly. The amphibian swam through the air as if it were in water, approaching his fingers with undulating movements. It circled his hand once, twice, then settled in his arm, its small body cool and slightly damp. Min began, clearly searching for word. "A glorified tadpole?" Lou suggested, unable to contain a mocking smile. Chapter 248, Taming True Knowledge. Min began, clearly searching for words. "A glorified tadpole?" Lou suggested, unable to contain a mocking smile. "It's perfect," Min corrected, marveling at the creature. "My invisible amphibian. Well, almost invisible. The translucent being rippled through the air with fluid grace. Its tiny body caught the light occasionally, revealing glimpses of intricate internal structures. It's still in the initial phase," Ren explained. "As it evolves, its invisibility capability will improve. For now, it's rather translucent." Taro leaned in to observe more closely. "It's quite small." He squinted, following the creature's movements with fascinated skepticism. "That will change, too," Ren assured. His mushrooms pulsed confidently, as if sharing a secret only they knew about the creature's potential. "For now," added Lou with a malicious smile, "it seems you've established a bond with a small animated blob of mucus." Min shot him a withering look. "Laugh all you want. When I can infiltrate where no one else can reach, I won't share any information with you." "Sure," Taro joined the teasing, "because we're all dying to know the school gossip like you and Han." Despite the jokes, the pride on Min's face was undeniable. His amphibian, small as it was the undeniable symbol that he had transformed into a double tamer. The achievement radiated from him, practically visible in the way he held himself taller. Ren observed the scene with satisfaction. The first egg had hatched correctly, validating his techniques and calculations. The others would follow soon, and with each new beast, their collective forces would strengthen. While Min continued marveling at his new beast, and Taro and Lou competed to create the best mocking nicknames for creature, Ren directed his attention toward the other nests. "Here," said Ren, extending a thin but meticulously bound book toward Min. "Here's everything you need to know about your amphibian for now. Development cycles, specific cultivation techniques, elemental compatibilities." Min took the book with reverence, running his fingers over cover where Ren had drawn the silhouette of his amphibian in its more developed form. The illustration showed a sleeker, more defined creature with extended limbs and complex gill structures. "You wrote it so quickly?" he asked, leafing to the pages densely covered with precise diagrams and carefully annotated text. "Yes," Ren responded while adjusting the conditions of Zhao's nest, which showed signs of being close to fully forming. The crystalline structure pulsed with slightly increased frequency, and internal energies had begun to align in preparation. Those sections about advanced interactions with other beasts are still missing. Lou, who was observing from his desk, closed the elementary theory book he was studying. "And will I get one when my egg is ready, boss?" Ren nodded, his mushrooms pulsing softly. "I've already started writing it, But with everything that's happened, I haven't had as much time as I'd like to progress. Don't rush, Lou shrugged, a casual smile on his face. Anyway, I have you here to ask directly. It's better than any book. Speak for yourself, Min interjected, without looking up from the manual. Some of us prefer to have clear instructions that don't disappear when Rin decides to get lost alone or kidnapped by the girls. Rin continued working in silence, but his mushrooms briefly pulsed with what his companions now recognized as a version of a laugh. The following days passed in an almost normal routine. Rin divided his time between classes, creating new eggs and attending to existing ones. It was during a particularly quiet afternoon when Taro burst into the room. "Rin," he announced. "Professor Wei wants to see you. He says it's important." Rin looked up from the nest he was adjusting, a slight frown appearing on his face. His relationship with Wei had been tense since the classroom incident, though the one bet had established a certain forced respect. "Did he tell you what for?" "Something about research," Taro replied, sitting on his bed. "Seems he's been reviewing all the literature on iron beasts with short cultivation cycles, the ones we use for the first exam. I think he wants your help to correct it." Rin considered the information. He wasn't particularly interested in helping Wei, but the prospect of correcting erroneous information that affected so many fellow students was tempting. "I told him I'd let you know, and if you decided to go, you'd see him in the library after the last class." Taro continued. "Hope you don't mind." Rin shook his head. "It's fine." When the day's last class ended, Rin headed to the library. The vast space, with its shelves reaching the ceiling and tables strategically scattered to maximize concentration, was unusually empty. Most students preferred to study in their rooms or in groups since the attack. At a secluded table, surrounded by piles of books and scrolls, he found Wei. The professor looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his normally impeccable tunic slightly wrinkled. He was so absorbed in an old tome that he didn't notice Ren's presence until he was standing directly across the table. "Ah, Pattender," Wei started slightly. "Thank you for coming. Please take a seat." Rin sat across from the professor, observing with interest the text scattered about. He recognized several treatises on iron rank cultivation, along with some standard academy manuals and what appeared to be original field notes. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Wei seemed to be struggling to find the right words, nervously reorganizing some papers in front of him. "I've been researching," he finally began, avoiding direct eye contact, "about initial beasts." Rin nodded, patiently waiting for Wei to get to the point. "The thing is," Wei cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, "your intervention in class raised significant doubts about the accuracy of our teaching materials." Another silence. Wei drummed his fingers on the table. "I've been comparing our texts with recent field observations," and Wei finally looked up, facing Rin directly. The professor breathed deeply, as if gathering courage for what was to follow. "I was wrong," he finally admitted. Rin maintained his neutral expression, though his mushrooms pulsed slightly faster, registering his mild surprise at this admission. The literature varies somewhat in its number of cultivation days, and that would be explained with an explanation of mana quantities from you for some reason. "I need help to verify it," Wei continued, gaining confidence as he spoke. "I've secured authorization to include an optional section in the final exam that follows your alternative cultivation methods." This truly captured Ren's complete attention. His mushrooms brightened noticeably, their pulses quickening with interest. "It won't be mandatory," Wei quickly clarified. "There's little time for students to adapt to such a fundamental change. But at the beginning..." Chapter 249, Taming the Top Student System. Wei shifted uncomfortably in his seat, as if what would come next was particularly difficult. His fingers nervously adjusted a stack of papers, aligning their edges with precision. "What I need is your help." The word seemed physically painful for him. "To identify the most crucial errors, especially those affecting your classmates' beasts. The main credit would be entirely yours. And also..." Wei paused, unnecessarily readjusting his position. "I also wanted to apologize," he finally said, so quickly that the words almost stumbled over each other. "For my previous behavior. It was unprofessional." Ren studied the professor for a moment. His mother had always taught him about the value of forgiveness, warning him against becoming a small person who clung to grudges. "Don't let pride make you petty," she would tell him. "Forgive when you can, but don't forget to learn from what happened." Added to that, Ren had mourned the loss of people he had met only recently, which gave him a fresh perspective. It wasn't worth holding grudges in times like these. Helping everyone could improve the city's situation in the long run. The city where he wanted to give his parents a better life. "I accept your apology, Professor," Ren responded after brief consideration. "And I'll help with your research, especially if it benefits my classmates. Well, most of them. Maybe Klein and Gene Group's beasts would have to wait longer to get their fixed methods." Maybe he was a bit petty. The relief on Wei's face was evident. His shoulders relaxed visibly, and color returned to his previously pale complexion. "Excellent. Thank you, Patenter. I prepared an initial list of 5 beasts to review. Weak plants, frogs, and 3 types of insects that are traditionally cheaper and have shorter cultivation periods than others, between 150 and 130 days. Also, as Wei explained his plan, Ren understood the true scope of the project. It wasn't just about correcting academic literature for wealthy students. Wei planned to seek volunteers outside the academy, young people from the peripheral areas of the city who normally wouldn't have access to proper cultivation instruction, to test the revised methods. Thanks to Professor Zhao's intervention, Wei continued, shuffling through his notes with renewed energy, Lin has authorized you to temporarily skip the nightly exercises to dedicate that time to this research. Perfect. Ren nodded. We'll start with the duration, mana quantity, and absorption method. It's 100 days and not one more. The crystal must have stable brightness, and absorption must be done by circulating in a specific pattern than. Professor May's class, traditionally a quiet bastion where students learned information useful for daily life, had undergone a notable transformation in recent days. The classroom, previously characterized by a relaxed atmosphere where no student actively participated, now vibrated with an almost palpable energy. The very air seemed charged with competitive spirit, crackling with tension whenever a question was posed. Hands rose constantly at each question, voices overlapped offering answers and additional examples, and debates about theoretical applications frequently extended beyond the assigned time. Mana poisoning manifestation occurs because the body processes too much mana from the environment, exceeding the contracted creature's absorption and expulsion capacity. May explained, her normally monotone voice now carrying a hint of enthusiasm. Could anyone provide the symptoms of this phenomenon? At least 5 hands shot up immediately. Klein, Jean, Luna, and several others from the noble group who rarely participated now competed for the professor's attention. Klein answered correctly when selected. Excellent answer, Goldcrest. May nodded, genuinely pleased with the level of detail. Can anyone give me an example of passive mana processing from their beasts? My Shadow Wolf, Luna interjected instance before being formally recognized, causes a decrease in perceived luminosity of up to 20%, even when not actively manipulating shadows. The effects are more pronounced in enclosed spaces. My Tiger, Jean quickly added, not wanting to be left behind, increases air purity by approximately 10%, which can be detected using appropriate perception instruments. May observed this display with barely disguised satisfaction. After years of teaching students who consider her subject merely complimentary, this sudden enthusiasm was refreshing. Her eyes sparkled with renewed purpose as she navigated the forest of raised hands. What most didn't notice was that Run, the culprit behind the situation, barely participated in this competition. Seated in his usual place, he meticulously took notes and responded when directly asked, but rarely raised his hand voluntarily. His mushrooms pulsed with their characteristic rhythm while absorbing the information, but his mind was clearly divided between class and other matters. For Run, the research with Wei occupied a significant portion of his concentration. Correcting errors in cultivation literature seemed more valuable to him than conquering participatory points in a competition he didn't even know was happening, because that was the crucial detail. Ren was almost completely unaware of what was at stake. The semester student honor, an objective that had awakened such competitive fervor in his classmates, was for him an abstract concept with no apparent practical value. He had never asked about its real meaning, and nobody had bothered to explain it to him. The academy system worked this way by design. Certain knowledge wasn't openly offered. It had to be sought, researched, conquered. Honor was one of those open secrets that separated the merely intelligent from the truly ambitious. For most students, advancing the academy simply meant passing all units satisfactorily. An Iron Rank student who completed their first year without failing anything would automatically become a Bronze 1 rank student, with all corresponding benefits. A daily stipend 10 times greater, 10 crystals instead of 1, better food, and access to new specialized classes. Failure in theoretical subjects of low value like maze meant remaining at the same rank, though advancing to the next year. Failure in high-value subjects like combat or gathering implied repeating the entire year, and receiving a strike. 3 of these meant a complete loss of academic support. But there existed a system within the system, invisible to those who didn't know to look for it. The top 10 students of each year had the option to pursue a more ambitious path, one that could eventually lead them to the coveted gold and platinum ranks. Gold was the minimum rank needed to achieve to realize the objective for which Selphra had planted a seed in his head. This system of silent selection wasn't determinative in the first year, but it established crucial foundations. Every student who had reached gold rank had been among the top 10 of their generation, and all platinum students, without exception, had obtained the honor of best student during their first year. Ryan, without knowing it, was about to secure that honor simply by doing what he considered right and necessary. His path, guided by instinct and intellect rather than ambition, was aligning perfectly with the Academy's highest trajectory. Chapter 250, Taming the Sky Stone. The throne room of Yino had never been a place for warmth. The walls of polished obsidian reflected the purple light of the abyssal crystals, creating an atmosphere as oppressive as it was majestic. The air seemed denser here, charged with the barely contained power of the beast pulsing beneath the skin of those who occupied positions of power. The king reviewed the scroll with an impenetrable expression, his eyes absorbing every detail of the report, while Lord Ravenspire remained silent, awaiting his reaction. Only the occasional purple flash that traveled through the monarch's veins betrayed the agitation the message caused him. These luminescent veins briefly illuminated his face from within, casting his features in an otherworldly glow. "Is this everything?" he finally asked, his voice deliberately controlled. "All they could report after reaching our borders, and before receiving attention from the healers, my lord," Ravenspire responded, his posture rigid with tension. "The complete details will be provided when they arrive at the capital." The king placed the scroll on the carved armrest of his throne. His fingers, partially transformed into claws, drummed on the surface with a rhythm that would have made anyone nervous who wasn't accustomed to the manifestations of his impatience amplified by his abyssal beast. "The seed was opened," he pronounced, not as a question but as confirmation of a regrettable fact. "But the ring wasn't there. Our agents were quite clear on this, my lord. After eliminating several Yano assets during the assault, they confirmed that the ring was not in the Academy leader's possession, nor did it arrive with any of the reinforcements to the battle." A heavy silence filled the hall as the king processed this information. The loss of the only power ring they could steal, especially the last one Yano needed, represented another significant setback in plans that had been developing for decades. "And our first triples remain in one piece?" he inquired, slightly changing the subject. Lord Ravenspire adjusted his posture, obviously uncomfortable, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their slight tremor. "They were effective in combat, my lord, but they demonstrated a certain lack of discipline. Elaborate. The combined power of 3 beasts seems to have affected their judgment capacity. They remained fighting long after determining the target wasn't present, apparently for mere personal satisfaction. This considerably complicated their retreat when additional Yano reinforcements arrived." The king didn't seem surprised, only slightly disappointed. "Intoxicated by their own power. A foreseeable side effect, although I had hoped our conditioning would have been more effective." He rose abruptly, his beast partially manifesting as he descended the throne steps. "Cashin reported correctly about the Academy's temporary vulnerability," he continued as he walked through the hall, each step resonating with an unnatural echo. "They sent too much security to protect the nobles during their excursion, neglecting their seed's main base. The opportunity was there. And our agents took advantage of it as best they could, my lord. Ravenspire attempted to appease him, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. Did they? The king stopped, turning to face his counselor. His eyes glowed with an inner light that made Ravenspire take an involuntary step backward. First, the herald fails to obtain the ring during the seed's opening. Then we send our first triples, our most valuable assets, and they return empty-handed too. His frustration was palpable, making the abyssal crystals pulse with greater intensity, bathing the hall in purple shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. What concerns me, he continued, his voice dropping to an almost meditative tone, is what this means. If the ring wasn't in the seed and isn't in the possession of Yano authorities, where is it? A messenger entered hurriedly, stopping at the entrance with a deep bow. My lord, Lord Bloodwind sends word. Hagen is fully prepared for the operation. The king considered this information for a moment, strategies and possibilities reconfiguring in his mind like pieces on an invisible board. No, he finally decided. Inform Bloodwind there is a change of plans. Hagen will not be deployed yet. My lord, Ravenspire couldn't hide his surprise. This situation smells like a trap, the king explained, resuming his pacing. If Yano doesn't have the ring, or is very skillfully hiding its possession, attacking now could be catastrophic. We need more information to know who has it. He stopped before a map carved in black stone, where the cities of Yino and Yano glowed with contrasting light, separated by the Abyss Rift. His finger traced the border between the kingdoms, lingering on the jagged line that marked their division. Redirect our efforts to intelligence gathering, and accelerate the triple program. Every soldier with a gold, one-level beast or higher must be prepared for conversion. All our nobles? Ravenspire couldn't help asking. The process isn't 100% safe yet, my lord. We could lose valuable warriors. It's an acceptable price for what we will gain, the king responded coldly. Even if Yano has all 3 rings in the hands of the Wandering King, they won't be able to resist all our triples once they are well trained. Ravenspire bowed his head in acceptance, but dared to raise an additional concern. And if they manage to open the upper door before we are prepared? The king slowly returned to his throne, his beast manifestations gradually retracting beneath his skin. A humorless smile briefly crossed his face. Then the war we have been preparing for decades will come to us on its own, and we'd better make sure we're in the best possible position when it does. But in our territory, at least, the entity protects us. He sat down, his posture regaining the royal formality he had momentarily abandoned. The Sky Stone gave us a unique opportunity, but this series of failures has forced us to adopt a defensive stance. However, patience, Lord Ravenspire, has always been Yino's most valuable virtue. In the purple darkness, no one could see the shadow of concern that briefly crossed the monarch's face. What none of them knew, what not even their most efficient spies or traitors had discovered, was that Yano wasn't hiding the ring as a trump card. They too didn't know its exact location with certainty. And so, the precarious balance between the 2 cities remained unaltered. The opening of the first door, the objective that both kingdoms had pursued for generations, would have to wait. Meanwhile, in the space between them, in the depths where beasts reigned supreme, the forces that would determine the fate of both kingdoms continued evolving, oblivious to the human ambitions try and control them.